What happens when the gods themselves decide you're too dangerous to live, before you've even learned to walk? Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the story of a man whose very existence made the queen of the gods so furious that she spent decades trying to kill him. You're about to witness 12 impossible tasks that would break any ordinary hero, labors so brutal that you probably won't survive hearing about them without needing a strong drink afterward. By the end of this journey, you'll understand why the name Heracles still makes people think twice about complaining when life gets tough. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing how this ancient story reaches people across the globe at all hours. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in ancient Thebes, watching a scene that shouldn't be possible. A baby, barely 8 months old, sits calmly in his crib while two massive serpents slither toward him through the darkness. These aren't garden-variety snakes, they're divine assassins, sent by Hera herself, and their venom could drop a grown warrior in seconds. The child's twin brother screams in terror, but this baby? He reaches out with chubby fingers and grasps both serpents by their necks. The sound of crushing vertebrae echoes through the nursery as those tiny hands squeeze the life from creatures that gods feared to touch. You're witnessing the first hint that this child, Heracles, carries blood that runs thicker than mortality itself. His father was Zeus, king of the gods, though his mother Alcmene was thoroughly human. Zeus had visited her in the form of her husband Amphitryon, extending one night into 3 to ensure their divine union would produce something extraordinary. Historians still argue whether the Greeks truly believed these literal divine encounters or understood them as metaphors for exceptional bloodlines, but the result was undeniable, a child whose strength defied natural law. Here's where it gets interesting, and slightly ridiculous. Hera, Zeus's perpetually furious wife, had already tried to kill Heracles before his birth by sending her daughter Eileithyia to delay the delivery. The plan was to ensure another child would be born first and claim the prophecy Zeus had made about his son ruling over all around him. Instead, Heracles arrived second but stronger than anyone had imagined possible. The serpent incident wasn't random divine wrath, it was calculated murder. Hera knew what this child represented, not just another of her husband's affairs, but a mortal who might actually challenge the natural order. She wasn't entirely wrong, though her methods left something to be desired. Ancient sources suggest these weren't ordinary snakes but sacred pythons from Apollo's temple at Delphi, meaning Heracles had technically committed his first act of sacrilege before he could even walk properly. You watch as the household awakens to find the baby playing with 2 enormous dead serpents like their rope toys. His adoptive father Amphitryon calls for the seer Tiresias, who delivers a prophecy that would make any parent lose sleep: this child will either become the greatest hero in history or die trying. No pressure there. The Greeks loved their tragic irony, and they understood something we often forget: that extraordinary gifts come with extraordinary prices. Heracles' divine strength wasn't a blessing, it was a curse waiting to unfold. You can see it in how he plays too roughly with other children, how his embraces leave bruises, how every gesture carries the potential for accidental destruction. His education becomes a carefully managed disaster. The finest tutors in Greece attempt to civilize this walking catastrophe. Linus, the music teacher, tries to teach him the lyre and ends up getting his skull crushed when young Heracles loses his temper over a wrong note. The boy claimed self-defense. Linus had raised his hand to strike, but you're starting to understand that Heracles' definition of proportional response might be slightly skewed. Ancient sources record that his archery instructor was Eurytus, his wrestling coach was Autolycus, and his chariot-driving teacher was Amphitryon himself. Each man contributed to creating what historians now recognize as the world's first systematically trained superhero. But training a divine weapon comes with risks. You're watching the forging of something that might save civilization or accidentally destroy it. The psychological pressure of being literally heaven-sent would break most people. Imagine knowing that your father is the king of the gods, your stepmother actively plots your death, and everyone expects you to be either a savior or a monster. There's no middle ground for children of Zeus. They either transcend mortality or get consumed by their own power. You notice how other children avoid playing with Heracles, how adults speak in whispers when he passes, how even dogs sense something unnatural in his presence. He's learning that strength without control is just destruction waiting for an excuse, but he's still decades away from understanding what that lesson will cost him. The most chilling detail comes from a fragment of Euripides. Apparently, young Heracles once killed a pet cat by petting it too enthusiastically. The Greeks understood that this wasn't cruelty, it was tragedy. A heart that wanted to love trapped in a body that could only destroy. As you watch this extraordinary child grow into something beyond human comprehension, you begin to understand why the gods themselves would eventually demand he prove his worth through 12 impossible labors. Some heroes are born from adversity, others are born as adversity itself, and spend their lives learning to become something better. The stage is set, the divine blood flows strong, and somewhere in the heavens, Hera sharpens her next attack. You're about to witness how even the mightiest heroes must sometimes be broken before they can become truly great. You're now watching Heracles as a grown man, standing over the bodies of his own children, blood still warm on his hands, his mind slowly clearing from a madness he didn't choose but cannot escape. This is the moment that transforms a hero into a slave, and it's about to get much worse before it gets better. The years between that serpent-strangling baby and this horrific scene blur together like a fever dream. You've watched Heracles grow into exactly what everyone feared, a walking catastrophe with the best intentions. He married Megara, princess of Thebes, and for a brief moment it seemed like domestic life might tame the divine wildness in his blood. They had 3 children together, maybe 4 depending on which ancient source you trust, and Heracles genuinely tried to be a gentle father. But Hera never forgot, never forgave, and certainly never stopped plotting. The attack came without warning, creeping into his mind like poison through his veins. You watch as his vision warps, as familiar faces transform into threats that must be eliminated. In his madness, Heracles sees not his beloved family but enemies of the state, monsters threatening his home. The divine strength that should have protected them becomes the instrument of their destruction. Ancient writers struggled with how to describe this scene without glorifying it. Euripides, in his tragedy, Heracles, suggests the madness came with hallucinations so vivid that the hero believed he was completing heroic quests while actually murdering his children. Imagine thinking you're saving the world while destroying everything you love. That's the special kind of hell Hera designed for her stepson. When the madness lifts, you see something break inside Heracles that will never fully heal. The man who could strangle serpents as a baby, who had spent decades learning to control his strength, discovers that all his training means nothing when the gods decide to use him as their puppet. His grief isn't just human sorrow, it's the cosmic anguish of someone who understands they've become a weapon that can never be safely put down. The legal consequences should have been straightforward: exile or execution for murder, divine blood or not. But ancient Greek justice recognized something modern courts struggle with. What do you do when someone commits crimes while literally possessed by divine madness? Historians still argue whether the Greeks actually believed in literal divine possession or used it as an early form of insanity defense, but the practical result was the same. Heracles flees to the oracle at Delphi, desperate for purification and guidance. The Pythia, Apollo's priestess who delivered prophecies while high on volcanic gases, gives him news that's somehow both devastating and hopeful. He must serve his cousin Eurystheus, king of Tiryns, for 12 years and complete whatever labors the king demands. Only then might the stain of innocent blood be washed from his soul. Here's where the cosmic joke becomes clear: Eurystheus is everything Heracles isn't. Weak, cowardly, and paranoid, he became king through the same prophecy manipulation that delayed Heracles' birth. Now this trembling man-child holds the fate of the world's greatest hero in his sweaty palms. The Greeks loved this kind of irony, the mighty serving the meek, strength kneeling before cunning. You watch Heracles arrive at Tiryns, no longer the confident hero but a broken man seeking redemption through service. Eurystheus literally hides in a bronze jar buried underground whenever his terrifying cousin visits, shouting orders through a herald because he's too frightened to face Heracles directly. Ancient sources describe this jar as being specially made, large enough for a grown man but buried deep enough that even divine strength couldn't easily reach it. The first labor is announced: kill the Nemean Lion, whose hide cannot be pierced by any weapon forged by mortal hands. It sounds impossible, which is exactly the point. Eurystheus isn't trying to give his cousin chances for glory. He's systematically attempting to arrange 12 different ways for Heracles to die honorably, thus solving the family's supernatural problem permanently. But there's something else happening here that you need to understand. These aren't just random monster-slaying missions, they're carefully designed psychological torture. Each labor forces Heracles to confront a different aspect of the uncontrollable power that led to his family's death. The lion represents brute force without strategy. The Hydra will teach him that some problems multiply when attacked directly. The golden hind will demand patience from someone whose strength usually provides instant solutions. Ancient mystery religions saw deeper symbolism in these trials. Some scholars suggest the 12 labors represent the soul's journey through different phases of spiritual purification, with each monster symbolizing a different human failing that must be conquered. Whether the original storytellers intended this level of metaphor remains debatable, but the psychological accuracy is unsettling. You notice how the other heroes of the age react to Heracles' punishment. Jason and the Argonauts continue their glory-seeking adventures while Heracles scrubs blood from his hands through menial service. Perseus slays monsters for fame, Heracles will kill them for penance. There's something fundamentally different about heroism pursued from guilt rather than ambition. The most disturbing detail comes from later sources suggesting that during his madness, Heracles also killed Megara herself. Earlier versions of the myth spared his wife, but later writers understood that true tragedy requires complete devastation. A hero who saves his spouse but murders his children gets to keep hope. One who destroys everything learns the weight of absolute consequence. As you watch Heracles prepare for his first labor, you see a man who has learned the most dangerous lesson possible, that good intentions mean nothing when you possess the power to destroy everything you touch. He's about to spend 12 years proving that strength without wisdom is just another form of madness, and that true heroism might require accepting a burden that never ends. The bronze jar trembles in the ground as Eurystheus issues his impossible commands, but you're beginning to understand that the real prison isn't the servitude, it's the knowledge that some mistakes can never be undone, only balanced with an eternity of atonement. You're standing at the edge of the Nemean Valley, watching Heracles examine tracks that would make a seasoned hunter weep with despair. These aren't ordinary paw prints, they're the size of dinner plates, pressed deep into rock as if the stone were soft clay. You're about to witness the birth of a legend, and it starts with a lion that laughs at arrows. The beast prowling these hills isn't just large, it's cosmically unfair. Born from the monsters Echidna and Typhon, basically the nightmare all-stars of Greek mythology, this lion carries divine protection woven into every golden hair of its hide. Zeus himself blessed this creature's skin to be impervious to mortal weapons, which seemed like a reasonable gift until someone decided a half-mortal hero should try to kill it. Heracles arrives in Nemea carrying his usual arsenal, a massive club carved from wild olive wood, a bow that requires divine strength just to string, and arrows dipped in hydra poison, though he doesn't have that particular advantage yet. You watch him test an arrow against a tree trunk, splitting the wood cleanly. Against ordinary prey, he's equipped to level a small army. Against this lion, he might as well be carrying a stern letter of complaint. The local shepherds paint a picture of supernatural terror when they describe their encounters. Flocks vanish overnight with no trace except those impossible tracks. Armed hunting parties return as scattered survivors babbling about arrows that bounce off golden fur like pebbles off bronze. One old shepherd swears he saw the lion catch a spear in its teeth and snap it like kindling, but alcohol might have contributed to that particular testimony. Here's where things get archaeologically interesting. Recent excavations in the Nemean Valley have uncovered lion bones significantly larger than any known subspecies, dating to roughly the right period. Historians still argue whether these represent an extinct cave lion variant or evidence that Greek monster stories had some basis in biological reality. Either way, something genuinely terrifying once roamed these hills. You follow Heracles as he tracks the beast to its lair, a cave system with two entrances, naturally, because even monster lairs follow dramatic conventions. Ancient sources describe this cave as having tunnels so deep that sounds echo for minutes, suggesting either impressive acoustic properties or serious exaggeration by people who never owned flashlights. The first encounter goes exactly as you'd expect from someone who hasn't learned that conventional weapons are useless here. Heracles positions himself at optimal range, draws his mighty bow, and sends an arrow flying with enough force to pierce bronze armor. The lion doesn't even flinch as the projectile bounces off its shoulder and clatters harmlessly into the rocks. What happens next reveals something crucial about Heracles' character development. Instead of trying the same failed approach repeatedly, a mistake that would define his earlier years, he stops and thinks. You can practically see the divine gears turning as he processes this new information: impervious hide, supernatural strength, conventional weapons useless. Time for unconventional solutions. The plan he devises shows why Heracles eventually becomes legendary for more than just brute strength. He blocks one cave entrance with massive boulders, using his divine power for engineering rather than direct assault. Then he enters through the remaining opening, trapping both himself and the lion in an enclosed space where neither can retreat. It's either brilliant strategy or suicidal overconfidence, and honestly, the line between those two approaches defines most of Heracles' career. You watch the confrontation unfold in darkness broken only by reflected light from the lion's golden mane. The beast launches itself at Heracles with claws that could shred bronze, but divine reflexes let him catch the creature mid-leap. What follows isn't a fight in any conventional sense, it's a wrestling match between supernatural forces, strength against strength, with no weapons allowed. The strangling takes longer than you'd expect, even with divine power. This isn't a mortal animal that needs to breathe, it's a creature sustained by cosmic forces that don't follow biological rules. Heracles has to maintain his grip for what feels like hours, muscles burning with divine fire, while the lion thrashes with enough force to crack stone walls. Ancient sources disagree about exactly how long the struggle lasted, with estimates ranging from 1 hour to 3 days. The truth probably lies somewhere between, but the psychological impact was clear. This was the first time Heracles had to rely purely on endurance rather than explosive strength. He's learning that some victories require sustained effort rather than dramatic gestures. When the lion finally goes limp, you witness something that will become Heracles' signature for the rest of his legendary career. Unable to skin the creature with conventional knives, the hide that protected it in life continues protecting it in death. He uses the lion's own claws to cut through its pelt. The resulting hide becomes both armor and symbol, proof that sometimes you need to use a problem's own strength against itself. The return to Tiryns provides the first glimpse of a pattern that will define all 12 labors. Eurystheus, safely buried in his bronze jar, nearly faints when he sees Heracles approaching wearing the golden lion skin. The impossible task was completed not through the expected heroic death, but through adaptation and intelligence applied to overwhelming strength. From this moment forward, no one who sees Heracles can mistake him for an ordinary hero. The lion's mane frames his face like a crown of conquered impossibility, and its hide turns every future battle into a statement. This man doesn't just kill monsters, he wears their power as casual clothing. You're watching the transformation of raw divine strength into something far more dangerous, intelligence-guided force that learns from each encounter and adapts accordingly. The scared, guilty man who arrived at Tiryns is evolving into something that will reshape the very definition of heroism. You're wading through the fetid swamps of Lerna, where the water bubbles with poison and the air itself seems to hiss with malevolent intent. The stench would drop a normal person in minutes, but you're following Heracles deeper into this nightmare landscape where something far worse than death awaits. Meet the Hydra, a creature that turns the very concept of killing into a cosmic joke. The beast coiled in the heart of these marshlands makes the Nemean Lion look like a reasonable opponent. Where that lion had one head and golden fur, the Hydra sports 9 serpentine heads, each one capable of independent thought, each mouth dripping venom so potent it can kill through skin contact. But here's the truly unfair part: cut off one head, and 2 grow back in its place. The Greeks really knew how to design a no-win scenario. Ancient sources describe the Hydra as offspring of Echidna and Typhon. Remember that monster power couple from the lion story, but this child inherited all their nastiest traits and none of their restraint. Its breath alone can kill a man, its blood dissolves anything organic, and it spent decades turning this entire region into an environmental disaster zone that would make modern toxic waste sites look like health spas. You watch Heracles survey the situation with the grim expression of someone who's starting to understand that Eurystheus isn't just trying to kill him, he's trying to do it creatively. The lion taught him about adapting tactics. The Hydra is about to teach him that some problems get worse when you attack them directly. It's a lesson in unintended consequences delivered by a creature that weaponizes multiplication. The local ecology tells the story of the Hydra's presence. Nothing grows here except twisted plants that feed on poison, and even those look unhealthy. The few animals you spot are either already dead or wish they were. One ancient historian noted that birds flying over the swamp would drop from the sky just from breathing the contaminated air, though that might be poetic exaggeration, or it might not. Heracles' first approach follows his usual pattern of overwhelming force applied with surgical precision. He lights arrows with flaming pitch and begins systematically targeting heads, watching each shot strike true with the satisfaction of someone who's mastered his craft. The satisfaction lasts exactly as long as it takes for the first severed head to sprout two replacements, each one angrier than the original. What you're witnessing isn't just failed strategy, it's a mathematical progression toward disaster. 9 heads become 11, then 15, then 23. Each new head seems to learn from its predecessor's destruction, snapping with increasing coordination and malice. The Hydra isn't just regenerating, it's evolving in real time, becoming deadlier with each of Heracles' attacks. The moment when understanding dawns on his face marks a crucial development in heroic thinking. This isn't a problem that can be solved through individual excellence or divine strength. Some monsters require teamwork, and Heracles calls for his nephew Iolaus to join the battle with a solution that's both brilliant and practical: cauterize the neck stumps with burning brands before new heads can grow. Historians still argue whether Iolaus actually participated in this labor or whether later storytellers added him to emphasize themes of cooperation versus individual heroism. The earliest sources are frustratingly vague, but the tactical innovation remains impressive regardless of its authorship. Sometimes the difference between victory and multiplication lies in preventing regeneration rather than increasing destruction. You watch the battle transform into a carefully choreographed dance of violence and fire. Heracles strikes with sword and club, severing heads with divine precision, while Iolaus follows immediately behind with flaming brands, sealing each wound before the monster's supernatural healing can take effect. Its brutal efficiency elevated to an art form, and it's working. But the Hydra has one final surprise: the central head, larger than the others and apparently immortal. No amount of fire can prevent its regeneration, and its venom is so concentrated that it turns Heracles' arrows into weapons of mass destruction just by contact. This is the head that will give Hydra poison its legendary reputation, the toxin that will eventually kill Heracles himself years later through bitter irony. The solution requires literal overkill. Heracles severs the immortal head and buries it under a massive boulder, trapping rather than destroying what cannot be killed. It's a compromise with cosmic forces, an acknowledgement that some evils can only be contained, never eliminated. The Greeks understood that perfect victories exist mainly in stories told to children. As you watch Heracles dip his arrows in the Hydra's blood, you're witnessing the creation of weapons that will feature in myths for generations. These poison arrows will kill centaurs, wound gods, and eventually cause their creator's own death through accident and betrayal. Every solution creates new problems, every victory carries the seeds of future tragedy. The return journey through the drained swampland reveals something important about environmental consequences. With the Hydra dead, the poison that saturated this region begins to dissipate, though it will take decades for normal life to return. You're seeing ecological recovery in real time, nature reclaiming land that had been held hostage by supernatural malice. Eurystheus' reaction to the completed second labor shows increasing desperation masked as legal technicality. He declares that this victory doesn't count because Heracles received help from Iolaus, establishing a precedent for moving goalposts that will define their entire relationship. The king is learning that straightforward monster fights won't eliminate his terrifying cousin, so the future labors will require increasingly creative forms of impossibility. But you've watched Heracles evolve again, from individual warrior to tactical commander who understands when teamwork trumps personal glory. The lion taught him adaptation, the Hydra taught him collaboration. He's becoming something more dangerous than a strong man with good intentions. He's becoming a problem solver who doesn't accept that any challenge is truly impossible. You're running through mountain forests that stretch beyond the horizon, your lungs burning as you try to keep pace with a chase that's been going on for exactly 365 days. Welcome to the most patient hunting expedition in mythological history, where the prey is a deer sacred to Artemis and the goal is to capture without harming something that can outrun the wind itself. The Ceranian hind isn't just any deer, it's a creature that makes Olympic sprinters look like they're moving through molasses. Golden antlers crown its head despite being female, a biological impossibility that immediately signals divine intervention. Bronze hooves strike sparks from solid rock, and its speed approaches something that modern physics would call theoretically impossible. Artemis claimed this deer as sacred after it evaded her own hunt, which should tell you everything about the magnitude of this particular challenge. Eurystheus thought he'd found the perfect trap when he assigned this labor. Either Heracles would fail to catch an uncatchable creature, or he'd succeed by harming it and face the wrath of Artemis, a goddess whose idea of proportional response involves turning people into deer and letting her hunting hounds tear them apart. It's a masterpiece of political maneuvering disguised as monster hunting, and you're watching it unfold in real time. The historical context makes this chase even more fascinating. Archaeological evidence suggests that golden-antlered deer were actually bred in certain Greek regions as temple animals, possibly descendants of reindeer populations that migrated south during ice ages. Historians still argue whether the mythological hind represents cultural memory of these extinct subspecies or pure fantasy, but the speed element remains consistently supernatural across all sources. You watch Heracles begin this labor with his usual approach, overwhelming force applied with divine efficiency. He tries to run the deer down through pure endurance, matching divine stamina against supernatural speed. For the first month, it seems almost possible. He keeps the creature in sight, following its trail across mountains and valleys with the determination of someone who's never met a problem he couldn't solve through persistence. By the third month, you're watching the slow dissolution of Heracles' confidence in brute force solutions. The deer hasn't even shown signs of fatigue while he's been pushed to the absolute limits of divine endurance. Every time he gets within arrow range, those bronze hooves carry his quarry beyond reach with insulting ease. This isn't a contest of strength or even skill, it's a lesson in accepting that some victories require strategies beyond heroic tradition. The seasonal changes mark the passage of this impossible year like a calendar written in exhaustion. You follow them through spring blossoms that give way to summer heat, autumn leaves that crunch underfoot, and winter snows that should have ended the chase but somehow don't. The deer seems equally comfortable in all conditions, while Heracles learns to hunt through weather that would kill ordinary mortals. Ancient sources describe encounters with various peoples during this year-long pursuit. The deer leads Heracles through lands belonging to the Hyperboreans, those mysterious far northern folk who supposedly lived in perpetual happiness beyond the reach of normal geography. Some scholars suggest this represents cultural contact between Greek colonists and Scythian tribes, though explaining how a deer-managed international diplomacy remains challenging. The psychological transformation you're witnessing is more profound than anything achieved in the previous labors. Heracles is learning patience, not the patience of waiting for the right moment to strike, but the deeper patience of accepting that some goals can only be achieved through sustained effort over impossible timeframes. It's meditation disguised as hunting, and it's changing him at a fundamental level. By the 9th month, you see Heracles developing tracking skills that border on supernatural. He can read the deer's intentions from the pattern of hoof prints, anticipate direction changes based on wind patterns and terrain features, and maintain pursuit through conditions that would blind normal hunters. He's becoming less human warrior and more force of nature, learning to think like the landscape itself. The turning point comes not through conquest but through understanding. Heracles realizes that he's been approaching this as a contest when it's actually a dance. The deer isn't fleeing him so much as leading him through a curriculum of endurance and humility. The moment he stops trying to catch it and starts trying to understand it, the dynamic shifts in ways that surprise everyone involved. The actual capture, when it finally comes, requires a precision shot that threads the needle between success and sacrilege. Heracles manages to pin the deer's legs with an arrow that passes between bone and sinew, causing no permanent harm while preventing escape. It's a shot that would be impossible without the supernatural archery skills developed during previous labors and the infinite patience learned during this endless chase. But the real test comes immediately afterward, when Artemis herself appears with that particular divine fury reserved for mortals who dare hunt her sacred animals. The conversation that follows, part negotiation, part theological debate, part plea bargain, establishes Heracles as someone who can stand before angry gods and explain himself without immediately being transformed into something small and hunted. You watch him present his case with a lawyer's precision. He was commanded by divine oracle to complete this labor, he captured without killing, and he intends to return the deer unharmed once Eurystheus acknowledges the completed task. It's bureaucratic theology at its finest, finding loopholes in divine will that technically satisfy everyone's requirements while solving no one's actual problems. Artemis's decision to allow the capture, temporarily and under strict conditions, marks another evolution in Heracles' heroic career. He's learning to navigate divine politics, understanding that gods respond to different arguments than monsters do. Strength and courage matter, but sometimes diplomacy and legal precision matter more. The journey back to Tiryns with his sacred captive becomes a victory parade that attracts attention from across the Greek world. You're following a man who has just proven that persistence can overcome impossibility, that patience can achieve what force cannot, and that even the most futile-seeming tasks might contain lessons worth learning. When Eurystheus sees the golden-antlered deer standing calmly beside his terrifying cousin, you watch a king realize that his strategy of impossible assignments is producing the opposite of his intended result. Instead of killing Heracles, these labors are transforming him into something far more dangerous than a strong man with anger issues. They're creating a hero who learns from every challenge and grows stronger through every apparent defeat. You're climbing through snow-covered peaks where the air is so thin that ordinary mortals would pass out from oxygen deprivation, following tracks that look like they were made by a creature the size of a small building with an attitude problem to match. The Erymanthian boar isn't just large, it's a mountain-sized ball of fury and tusks that has turned an entire region into a no-go zone for anyone foolish enough to value their internal organs. This particular monster calls Mount Erymanthus home, a peak so remote that even the hardiest shepherds avoid its slopes. The boar has been terrorizing the region for years, destroying crops, demolishing villages, and generally behaving like a natural disaster with anger management issues. Its tusks can split trees like kindling, its charge can flatten stone walls, and its temper makes the Nemean Lion look like a house cat with mild anxiety. The seasonal timing of this labor adds another layer of complexity that Eurystheus probably considered a bonus difficulty modifier. You're tracking this beast through deep winter snow, where every step is a battle against elements that want to freeze you solid before the boar gets a chance to gore you properly. Ancient sources suggest this timing was deliberate, the boar is most dangerous when driven by winter hunger and most vulnerable when slowed by deep snow. Heracles approaches this challenge with a strategy that shows how much he's learned from previous encounters. Instead of charging headlong into another direct confrontation, he studies the terrain and weather conditions like a general planning a campaign. The snow that makes travel difficult for him makes it nearly impossible for something the boar's size, and winter means limited food sources that will force the creature into predictable movement patterns. You watch him visit the centaur Pholus, who lives in a cave on the mountain's lower slopes and maintains a hospitality that would make ancient Greek hosts proud. The centaur shares wine and wisdom, warning Heracles about the boar's territorial behavior and suggesting tactics that might work better than brute force approaches. It's another lesson in seeking local knowledge before attempting impossible tasks. The wine-sharing scene becomes unexpectedly significant when other centaurs arrive, drawn by the scent of the special vintage that belongs to all centaurs collectively. What starts as a pleasant social gathering turns into a drunken brawl that ends with Heracles accidentally shooting Pholus with a hydra-poisoned arrow while trying to defend his host. You're witnessing the first time that a weapon created during previous labors causes unintended casualties in subsequent adventures. This tragic accident introduces a theme that will haunt Heracles throughout his remaining labors. The tools and knowledge gained from each challenge carry forward into future encounters, sometimes with devastating consequences. The hydra poison that made his arrows supernaturally deadly also makes them supernaturally dangerous to friends and innocent bystanders. Power without perfect control remains a recipe for tragedy. The actual boar hunt requires patience that would test a saint's endurance. You follow Heracles as he drives the creature higher up the mountain through a campaign of strategic harassment, appearing at feeding sites to disrupt meals, blocking access to water sources, and generally making the boar's life so miserable that it becomes increasingly desperate and predictable in its movements. Ancient hunting manuals describe similar techniques for capturing dangerous prey alive, suggesting that this myth preserves genuine knowledge about large-game hunting practices. The key insight is that exhaustion and desperation make even the most dangerous animals manageable, provided the hunter has enough patience and tactical sense to avoid direct confrontation until the odds shift decisively in his favor. The trap Heracles sets shows engineering skills that complement his raw strength beautifully. Using the mountain's natural snow fields, he drives the boar into increasingly deep drifts where its weight becomes a disadvantage rather than an asset. You watch a creature that can demolish buildings struggle helplessly against snow that reaches its belly, movement slowing to a frustrated crawl as winter itself becomes Heracles' ally. The capture scene demonstrates how much Heracles has evolved since his early labors. Instead of wrestling the boar into submission, which would probably result in mutual destruction, he uses ropes and leverage to immobilize it while avoiding those deadly tusks. It's applied physics rather than applied violence, intelligence guided by experience rather than strength guided by instinct. Historians still argue whether the Erymanthian boar represents cultural memory of now extinct megafauna or pure mythological invention, but recent archaeological evidence suggests that unusually large wild boar did inhabit ancient Greek mountains. Bone fragments from sites near Mount Erymanthus show specimens significantly larger than modern European boar, though whether they approached mythological proportions remains debatable. The journey back to Tiryns with a live, furious boar provides some of the most entertainingly terrifying moments in the entire labor cycle. You're following a procession that clears roads for miles in advance, as news of the approaching monster spreads faster than Heracles can travel. Entire towns evacuate rather than risk encountering a creature that could level buildings if it breaks free from its restraints. Eurystheus' reaction to seeing his cousin arrive with the boar slung over his shoulders like an oversized hunting trophy reaches new heights of comic terror. The king not only hides in his bronze jar but has it reinforced with additional layers of metal and buried deeper underground. Ancient sources describe him shrieking orders through a speaking tube while cowering at the bottom of his increasingly elaborate bunker. The psychological impact of this labor on both Heracles and his observers marks another significant development. Where previous challenges tested strength, speed, or patience individually, the boar hunt required integrating all these qualities with tactical planning and environmental awareness. You're watching the emergence of a complete hero rather than just a strong man with good intentions. More importantly, the accidental death of Pholus introduces the tragic theme that will define Heracles' later career, that heroic actions inevitably carry costs beyond the immediate mission objectives. The centaur's death wasn't intentional or necessary, but it resulted directly from tools and situations created by heroic activities. Some victories require accepting that perfect outcomes exist mainly in stories told to comfort children. As you watch Heracles present the captured boar to his terrified cousin, you're seeing the consolidation of lessons learned through 4 impossible challenges. Strength, adaptation, patience, and tactical intelligence are combining into something that transcends traditional heroic categories. The scared, guilt-ridden man who began these labors is evolving into a force that even gods will eventually have to take seriously. You're standing in what might be the worst workplace in human history, staring at 30 years' worth of accumulated manure from 3,000 immortal cattle. The stench hits you like a physical force, strong enough to knock buzzards out of the sky and make hardened soldiers weep openly. Welcome to the Augean stables, where King Augeas has managed to turn divine livestock into an environmental catastrophe that would make modern waste management engineers quit their jobs and become hermits. The mathematical impossibility of this situation becomes clear once you start calculating volumes. 3,000 cattle producing waste continuously for 3 decades equals roughly enough manure to bury a small city, and that's assuming normal bovine biology. These are divine cattle, blessed by Helios the sun god with supernatural health and productivity, which means they probably produce waste at superhuman rates while never getting sick enough to die and reduce the herd size. Augeas himself presents an interesting study in willful ignorance masquerading as royal authority. He spent decades ignoring a problem that grows worse daily, apparently believing that if you pretend a disaster isn't happening, it will somehow resolve itself through divine intervention or royal decree. You're watching a masterclass in how leadership failures can create situations that require heroic intervention to fix. The local environmental impact tells the whole story of sustained neglect. The nearby river has changed course twice trying to avoid contamination, entire forests have died from runoff poisoning, and the regional wildlife population has either fled or evolved into species that feed exclusively on decomposing organic matter. It's an ecological disaster zone that makes the Hydra's swamp look like a nature preserve. Eurystheus obviously expected this labor to break Heracles through sheer physical impossibility. Even divine strength has limits, and manually removing 30 years of accumulated waste would take longer than a human lifetime to complete. The king probably envisioned his terrifying cousin spending decades literally shoveling manure until old age or despair finally eliminated the family problem permanently. But you're watching Heracles approach this challenge with the accumulated wisdom of 5 previous labors. He surveys the situation like an engineer rather than a warrior, studying terrain features and water flow patterns instead of looking for something to punch into submission. The evolution from berserker to problem solver is becoming increasingly pronounced with each impossible task. The solution he devises shows why legends eventually credited him with intelligence to match his strength. Instead of attempting to move the manure, he decides to move the rivers. The Alpheus and Peneus flow nearby, carrying enough water volume to wash away decades of accumulated waste if they can be redirected through the stable complex. It's hydraulic engineering on a scale that wouldn't look out of place in a modern dam project. Ancient sources describe the construction process in terms that suggest familiarity with actual engineering techniques. Heracles builds temporary dams upstream, excavates channels through the stable complex, and creates controlled flooding that scours away contamination while preserving the essential infrastructure. You're witnessing applied physics rather than applied mythology, practical problem-solving elevated to heroic proportions. The negotiation with Argolis adds another layer of complexity that shows Heracles learning to protect himself from royal duplicity. He demands payment for this service, specifically, 1/10 of the divine cattle herd, and secures the agreement through witnesses before beginning work. It's the first time he's approached a labor as a contractor rather than a servant, showing growth in political sophistication alongside physical prowess. Historians still argue whether the Argean stables represent a real historical cleanup project elevated to mythological status or pure fantasy, but the engineering techniques described are entirely feasible using ancient Greek technology. River diversion projects were common in the ancient world, though rarely undertaken to solve livestock waste management problems on this scale. The actual flood, when it comes, transforms the landscape in ways that justify the mythological treatment. You watch 30 years of accumulated waste disappear in a matter of hours, carried away by waters that turn the downstream regions into the most fertilized agricultural land in Greek history. It's environmental remediation through controlled natural disaster, and it works with spectacular efficiency. The aftermath reveals both the benefits and complications of thinking beyond traditional heroic approaches. The stables are cleaner than they've been in decades, the local ecosystem begins recovering immediately, and Argolis enjoys the most productive farmland in the region. But the king refuses to honor his agreement, claiming that since Heracles was ordered to perform this labor anyway, no additional payment is required. This betrayal introduces Heracles to the wonderful world of contract law and royal prerogative, where agreements mean exactly what powerful people want them to mean at any given moment. The legal precedent being established here, that kings can retroactively modify contracts after receiving services, would make modern lawyers reach for strong drinks and consider career changes. Eurystheus' response to the completed labor shows increasingly desperate creativity in finding technicalities. He declares that this task doesn't count toward the 12 labors because Heracles received payment for the work, conveniently ignoring that the payment was refused and never actually delivered. The moving goalposts are becoming so obvious that even divine oracles are starting to question the legitimacy of this arrangement. But you're watching something more significant than legal maneuvering and royal paranoia. The stable cleaning demonstrates that heroic thinking can be applied to problems that don't involve monsters or violence. Sometimes the most challenging opponents are inefficiency, accumulated neglect, and systems that have failed through sustained incompetence rather than supernatural malice. The environmental restoration that follows the flood creates long-term benefits that extend far beyond the immediate labor requirements. You're seeing ecological recovery accelerated by heroic intervention, proof that the right application of force and intelligence can solve problems that seemed intractable through conventional approaches. The land will remain more fertile for generations because one hero decided to think like an engineer instead of a warrior. More importantly, Heracles is learning that some victories require accepting incomplete resolution. The stables are clean, but Argolis remains dishonest. The environmental problem is solved, but the political problem persists. Perfect solutions exist mainly in stories designed to comfort people who haven't encountered the messy realities of dealing with corrupt leadership and complex systems. As you watch the newly cleaned stables gleaming in sunlight for the first time in decades, you're seeing the consolidation of another crucial lesson, that heroic action sometimes requires creating lasting change rather than achieving dramatic moments. The cattle will continue producing waste, but now there's a system in place to handle it sustainably. Prevention beats cure, and good engineering beats good intentions. You're standing beside Lake Stymphalia, where the water reflects something that shouldn't exist in any sane universe, a flock of birds with bronze beaks, metallic feathers sharp as sword blades, and an appetite for human flesh that would make sharks seem like vegetarians. The Stymphalian birds have turned this entire region into a no-fly zone where even eagles fear to soar, and you're about to witness why sometimes the best heroic strategy involves making more noise than a death metal concert. These aren't ordinary birds that happen to evolve unfortunate dietary preferences. They're creatures sacred to Ares, the god of war, which explains both their supernatural aggression and their complete lack of interest in peaceful coexistence with anything that bleeds. Their bronze beaks can pierce armor, their metallic feathers can be shot like arrows with deadly accuracy, and their sheer numbers turn the sky above the lake into a storm of razor-sharp death waiting to descend on anything foolish enough to disturb their territory. The local population has been reduced to a handful of survivors who live in underground shelters and emerge only during heavy storms when the birds seek cover. Ancient sources describe farmers who tried to work their fields being stripped to bone in minutes, travelers who took wrong turns becoming feathered pincushions before they could scream, and hunting parties that went out confident and came back as collections of scattered bones with mysterious puncture wounds. Archaeological evidence suggests that the Stymphalian region actually did experience an ecological disaster around this period, though whether it involved carnivorous birds or more mundane causes remains debatable. Historians still argue whether the myth represents cultural memory of an invasive species event or pure fantasy, but the described behavior patterns match what we know about flocking animals that have lost their natural food sources and turned to opportunistic predation. Heracles approaches this challenge with his usual initial strategy, direct assault using overwhelming force. You watch him try shooting arrows at individual birds, which works about as well as you'd expect when facing a flock of several thousand creatures that can fly faster than projectiles and shoot back with their own metallic feathers. His first volley brings down maybe a dozen birds while attracting the hostile attention of all the survivors, who respond with aerial bombardment that would make modern fighter pilots respect their tactical coordination. The retreat to higher ground provides time for tactical reassessment and a growing appreciation for the magnitude of this particular problem. Unlike previous opponents that could be tracked, cornered, or outmaneuvered through terrain advantages, the birds control three-dimensional space and can attack from any direction simultaneously. Traditional heroic approaches, strength, speed, patience, engineering, all fall short when facing enemies that refuse to engage on terrestrial terms. Divine intervention arrives in the form of Athena, goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare, who provides Heracles with bronze castanets crafted by Hephaestus himself. These aren't ordinary musical instruments, they're sonic weapons designed to produce sounds so terrifying that even supernatural creatures will flee rather than endure the auditory assault. It's the ancient equivalent of psychological warfare through weaponized noise pollution. The strategy that emerges shows Heracles integrating divine assistance with tactical thinking in ways that previous labors only hinted at. Instead of trying to fight thousands of individual opponents, he positions himself on high ground and begins creating a sound that drives the birds into panicked flight. The castanets produce noise that apparently resonates at frequencies that bronze-beaked nervous systems find absolutely intolerable. What happens next demonstrates why some problems require area effect solutions rather than targeted responses. The entire flock rises simultaneously, creating a metallic cloud that blocks out the sun while generating its own weather system through coordinated wing beats. You're watching aerial choreography on a scale that makes modern air shows look like children playing with paper airplanes, except these performers are fleeing in supernatural terror rather than demonstrating precision flying. The mass exodus solves the regional bird problem but creates new challenges for neighboring areas that suddenly find themselves hosting refugees with serious attitude problems and dietary restrictions that include human flesh. Ancient sources suggest the birds scattered across the known world, with some eventually reaching the Black Sea region where they later menaced Jason and the Argonauts. One hero's solution becomes another hero's problem, a pattern that will repeat throughout Greek mythology. Heracles' follow-up strategy shows increasing sophistication in long-term problem management. Rather than simply celebrating the immediate victory, he spends weeks tracking down individual birds that remained hidden during the mass flight, ensuring that the regional threat is completely eliminated rather than temporarily dispersed. It's thorough victory rather than dramatic gesture, proof that he's learning to think beyond the immediate requirements of each task. The psychological impact of this labor extends beyond the immediate tactical lessons. You're watching Heracles learn to accept divine assistance without sacrificing personal agency, integrating supernatural aid with his own capabilities rather than becoming dependent on external intervention. The castanets amplify his strategic thinking rather than replacing it, showing mature collaboration between mortal effort and divine support. Ancient sources describe the grateful response of the Stymphalian survivors, who emerge from their underground shelters to find clear skies for the first time in years. The agricultural recovery happens quickly once the aerial threat disappears, but the psychological recovery takes longer. People who have lived under constant threat of death from above need time to believe that safety is permanent rather than temporary. The return to Tiryns provides another opportunity to observe Eurystheus' increasingly creative approaches to denying labor completion. This time he questions whether driving away monsters counts as the same thing as killing them, establishing precedents for sophistry that would make modern lawyers proud. The king is learning that straightforward impossible tasks aren't eliminating his problematic cousin, so future challenges will require even more baroque forms of creative impossibility. But you're watching Heracles develop capabilities that transcend traditional heroic categories. The bird labor taught him about area effect problem solving, coordinated response to distributed threats, and the integration of divine assistance with personal capability. He's becoming something more versatile than a strong man who kills monsters. He's evolving into a strategic thinker who can adapt supernatural capabilities to complex challenges. The broader implications of this victory extend beyond individual heroism into questions of environmental management and technological innovation. The castanets represent applied acoustics used for biological control, while the successful elimination of an invasive species demonstrates that ecological disasters can be reversed through targeted intervention. Sometimes saving civilization requires thinking like a scientist rather than a warrior. As you watch the clear skies above Lake Stymphalia, where normal birds now fly without fear of bronze-beaked predators, you're seeing proof that heroic action can restore natural balance rather than simply creating more dramatic imbalances. The lake will support normal wildlife for generations because one hero learned to make the right kind of noise at exactly the right moment. You're sailing across the wine-dark sea toward Crete, where King Minos rules over an island paradise that harbors one of the most dangerous creatures ever to draw breath. The white bull you're hunting isn't just any sacred animal, it's the same magnificent beast that Poseidon sent from the waves, the one that Minos was supposed to sacrifice but kept for himself, the father of the Minotaur currently terrorizing people in the labyrinth beneath the palace. Sometimes divine livestock comes with generational consequences that make family therapy look simple. The political situation on Crete adds layers of complexity that previous labors only hinted at. King Minos rules the most sophisticated civilization in the Mediterranean, commanding naval forces that could turn any ordinary hero into fish food before he reached the harbor. But Minos also faces a supernatural crisis that's destroying his kingdom from within. The bull has gone completely mad, probably from realizing its offspring is locked in a basement eating human sacrifices while its master pretends this is somehow normal royal behavior. Ancient sources describe the Cretan bull as being pure white with horns that gleam like polished silver, eyes that burn with divine fire, and a temperament that makes hurricanes seem predictable. Poseidon originally sent this creature as a sign of divine favor, but keeping it instead of sacrificing it as promised has turned blessing into curse. The bull now rampages across the island, destroying crops, demolishing buildings, and generally behaving like a natural disaster with personal grievances against human civilization. You watch Heracles negotiate landing rights with Minoan officials who are desperately trying to maintain dignity while their kingdom falls apart around them. The conversation involves diplomatic protocols that would challenge modern ambassadors. How do you politely request permission to capture a divine animal that's destroying someone's country without implying that their king is an idiot who brought this disaster on himself through theological cheapskating? The cultural exchange that follows provides fascinating insights into Bronze Age international relations. Minos offers Heracles full cooperation in capturing the bull, which suggests either genuine desperation or sophisticated understanding that some problems require outside expertise to solve. The Minoan civilization was remarkably advanced, but apparently their monster-wrangling technology had certain limitations when dealing with divinely cursed livestock. Historians still argue whether the Cretan bull represents cultural memory of actual historical events or pure mythological invention, but recent archaeological evidence suggests that bull-centered religious practices were central to Minoan civilization. The famous bull-leaping frescoes at Knossos might preserve traditions related to ritualized interaction with dangerous cattle, though whether these involved supernatural animals remains debatable. The tracking phase reveals just how much damage one angry divine bull can cause when left unsupervised. You follow a trail of destruction that reads like a natural disaster survey: flattened olive groves, demolished farmhouses, traumatized livestock, and entire villages that have been temporarily abandoned until someone figures out how to deal with their four-legged apocalypse. The bull doesn't just attack people, it seems to take personal offense at human attempts to impose order on the landscape. Heracles' approach shows continued evolution in tactical thinking, incorporating lessons learned from 8 previous impossible challenges. Instead of attempting direct confrontation with a creature that could probably headbutt him into the next century, he studies its behavioral patterns and movement habits. The bull's madness follows certain predictable cycles, alternating between periods of focused destruction and exhausted rest that provide opportunities for strategic intervention. The capture strategy requires integrating strength with timing in ways that previous labors only hinted at. You watch Heracles position himself at a narrow mountain pass where the bull's size becomes a disadvantage rather than an asset, then use carefully placed obstacles to channel its charge into a trajectory that allows for rope work rather than wrestling. It's applied physics elevated to an art form, intelligence guided by experience rather than strength guided by instinct. The actual confrontation demonstrates why this bull earned its reputation as divine livestock gone wrong. Even contained in the mountain pass, it fights with supernatural fury that makes the Nemean Lion look like a sleepy house cat. Its charge generates enough force to crack stone walls, its hooves strike sparks from solid rock, and its bellowing echoes across the island like thunder announcing the end of the world. But you're watching Heracles apply techniques perfected through previous encounters with impossible opponents. The ropes and leverage systems work because he learned engineering principles during the stable cleaning. The timing and positioning succeed because he learned patience during the deer hunt. Each labor builds on previous lessons, creating capabilities that transcend simple addition of skills. The restraint process requires acknowledging that some creatures can't be permanently contained through physical means alone. The bull's divine nature means it will eventually break free from any mortal restraints, so the goal becomes temporary control rather than permanent capture. Heracles is learning to work within the limitations imposed by cosmic forces rather than trying to overcome them through pure determination. The sea voyage back to Greece with a captive divine bull provides some of the most entertainingly terrifying moments in maritime history. You're aboard a ship where the cargo could probably sink the vessel through sheer indignation if it decides to object strongly enough to its travel arrangements. Ancient navigation techniques weren't designed to accommodate livestock that could theoretically challenge Poseidon's authority over oceanic matters. The bull's behavior during transport reveals interesting details about divine psychology and supernatural stress responses. Removed from the familiar territory where its madness had focused, it becomes calmer but not necessarily safer, like a tornado that has moved from land to sea and might change direction unpredictably. The crew maintains respectful distance while offering prayers to every maritime deity they can remember. Eurystheus' reaction to seeing his cousin arrive with the Cretan bull reaches new heights of creative cowardice. Not only does he hide in his reinforced bronze jar, but he has additional tunnels dug to provide escape routes in case the bull decides to investigate underground spaces. The king is learning that each completed labor brings increasingly dangerous souvenirs that could accidentally level his entire kingdom. The disposal of the bull after the labor's completion creates problems that will resonate through future generations. Heracles releases it in the region around Marathon, where it eventually terrorizes local populations until Theseus finally kills it years later. One hero's completed task becomes another hero's origin story, showing how mythological problems tend to persist through different forms rather than achieving permanent resolution. You're watching the consolidation of another crucial lesson about heroic responsibility and unintended consequences. The bull capture succeeds brilliantly as an individual achievement, but creates downstream problems that require additional heroic intervention to resolve. Perfect solutions remain largely theoretical when dealing with supernatural forces that exist outside normal categories of cause and effect. As you observe the bull's release near Marathon, you're seeing proof that heroic actions ripple through time in ways that heroes themselves rarely anticipate. The creature that terrorized Crete will terrorize Attica, creating opportunities for future heroes while solving immediate problems for current ones. Success and failure interweave in patterns too complex for simple moral categories. You're following Heracles as he turns his attention northward toward Thrace, where King Diomedes rules over a kingdom that has developed some truly disturbing dietary innovations. The horses in question aren't your typical stable animals that get excited about sugar cubes and gentle pats. These mares have developed a taste for human flesh that makes the Cretan bull's rampage look like a peaceful agricultural dispute. Sometimes royal hospitality takes forms that would make cannibals question their life choices. The journey to Thrace reveals a landscape shaped by generations of systematic cruelty that has infected everything from architecture to animal husbandry. Diomedes has created a kingdom where violence has become so institutionalized that even the livestock participates in activities that would horrify normal predators. The mares aren't naturally carnivorous, they've been deliberately trained to eat human beings as part of a feeding program that doubles as royal entertainment and population control. You watch Heracles gather intelligence about his target through conversations with refugees who've escaped Diomedes' kingdom with stories that sound like fever dreams induced by particularly creative nightmares. The king apparently feeds his horses a steady diet of unwelcome guests, political prisoners, and anyone else who happens to inconvenience his rule. It's a system that combines efficient waste disposal with livestock management in ways that demonstrate why some innovations shouldn't survive the experimental phase. Ancient sources describe these mares as being larger than normal horses, with teeth that have been filed to points and temperaments that make rabid wolves seem friendly by comparison. They're kept in bronze mangers that double as feeding troughs for meals that require no cooking preparation. The horses prefer their protein fresh and struggling. The stables are designed more like prison cells than animal housing, with reinforced walls to contain creatures that could probably bite through standard masonry. The political implications of this labor extend beyond simple monster hunting into questions about legitimate royal authority and the limits of acceptable governance. Diomedes represents the kind of ruler who has crossed lines that separate civilization from organized barbarism, creating a kingdom where normal diplomatic protocols become meaningless. You can't negotiate with someone whose idea of treaty ratification involves introducing foreign ambassadors to carnivorous livestock. Historians still argue whether the man-eating mares represent symbolic commentary on tyrannical rule or actual historical memory of particularly brutal Bronze Age kingdoms, but the underlying message about power corrupting absolutely remains relevant across cultures and centuries. Some rulers become so divorced from normal human behavior that they create institutions that reflect their psychological distortions in increasingly grotesque forms. The reconnaissance phase reveals that Diomedes has built his entire kingdom around the premise that fear is the most effective form of government, with the mares serving as both execution method and deterrent to potential rebellion. Citizens live in constant awareness that disappointing their king could result in becoming horse food, which creates social dynamics that make normal human relationships nearly impossible to maintain. You're watching Heracles realize that this labor requires different moral calculations than previous challenges. The Nemean Lion, Hydra, and Cretan Bull were dangerous but not evil, they acted according to their nature without malicious intent. Diomedes and his mares represent deliberately chosen cruelty that has been systematically refined over years of practice. Sometimes heroes must confront human monsters that make supernatural ones seem comparatively innocent. The tactical approach involves acknowledging that capturing the mares without dealing with their keeper would be like treating symptoms while ignoring the disease. Diomedes has created these creatures through training methods that probably involve techniques too disturbing to describe in detail, and he's not going to cooperate with efforts to undo his handiwork. The man-eating horses exist because their master enjoys watching people get eaten by horses. The infiltration strategy demonstrates continued evolution in Heracles' problem-solving methodology. Instead of announcing his presence and demanding the horses through formal challenge, he arrives disguised as a traveling merchant with goods that might interest a king with exotic tastes. Sometimes the best approach to impossible situations involves temporarily accepting that you're dealing with people who operate outside normal categories of human behavior. The initial encounter with the mares provides some of the most genuinely terrifying moments in the entire cycle of labors. You're watching animals that have been transformed into something that violates basic assumptions about the natural world, creatures that represent human cruelty refined into a form that transcends species boundaries. Their eyes show intelligence that has been deliberately corrupted, awareness that has been twisted into something that shouldn't exist. The feeding ritual that follows arrival at Diomedes' court reveals the full scope of the kingdom's moral corruption. The king treats horse feeding time as entertainment, inviting guests to watch proceedings that normal people would find traumatizing. It's hospitality designed to demonstrate power through systematic dehumanization, social interaction that has been weaponized into psychological warfare. But you're also watching Heracles identify the crucial weakness in Diomedes' system. The king's overconfidence in his own invulnerability has made him careless about personal security. Someone who rules through fear often assumes that fear provides complete protection, overlooking possibilities that their victims might eventually find champions willing to risk everything for justice. The confrontation unfolds with swift brutality that reflects the moral clarity of the situation. Diomedes has created a kingdom where normal rules of civilized behavior don't apply, so Heracles responds with methods that match the environment he's entered. Sometimes justice requires accepting that certain people have forfeited their right to mercy through choices that place them outside the boundaries of acceptable human behavior. The capture process involves reversing the feeding relationship in ways that provide poetic justice while solving the practical problem of containing supernatural dangerous livestock. You watch the Mares experience their first meal of royal flesh, discovering that their training works equally well on kings and commoners. Their creator becomes their final victim, completing a cycle that has a certain symmetrical appropriateness. The journey back to Tiryns with 4 now docile horses provides insight into animal psychology and the relationship between training and nature. Removed from the environment that reinforced their unnatural behavior, the Mares gradually return to more typical equine temperaments. Evil isn't always permanent when it's learned rather than inherent, though the process of unlearning requires patience and consistent alternative experiences. The resolution demonstrates another crucial lesson about heroic responsibility and moral complexity. The Mares capture succeeds not just through strength but through willingness to confront systematic cruelty that other people preferred to ignore. Sometimes heroism requires acknowledging that certain situations can't be resolved through negotiation or compromise. They require someone willing to use force against people who have placed themselves beyond the reach of normal social constraints. You're sailing south across the Black Sea toward the land of the Amazons, where warrior women have built a civilization that challenges every assumption Greek society holds about gender, power, and military capability. The Golden Belt of Queen Hippolyta isn't just another magical artifact. It's a symbol of authority that represents everything Greek men find simultaneously fascinating and terrifying about women who refuse to accept traditional limitations. Sometimes the most dangerous battles involve confronting your own cultural prejudices rather than supernatural monsters. The Amazon kingdom represents a complete inversion of normal Mediterranean social structures, where women hold all positions of military and political authority while men exist largely as supporting characters in someone else's story. These aren't women pretending to be warriors for dramatic effect, they're professional soldiers who have spent generations perfecting combat techniques that make Greek military training look like recreational exercise. The cultural shock value alone could probably defeat most heroes before they draw their weapons. You watch Heracles navigate diplomatic waters that are far more treacherous than any physical challenge he's faced so far. The Amazons aren't monsters to be defeated or puzzles to be solved, they're intelligent adversaries with their own political agendas, military capabilities, and reasonable grounds for viewing Greek visitors with suspicion. Previous encounters with Mediterranean civilizations haven't exactly established a track record of cultural sensitivity or mutual respect. Ancient sources describe Hippolyta as combining physical prowess with political sophistication in ways that confound traditional categories of leadership. She's simultaneously a warrior queen who could personally defeat most male heroes in single combat and a diplomatic strategist who understands exactly how to manage relationships with neighboring civilizations. The golden belt she wears represents divine favor from Ares himself, marking her as someone whose authority extends beyond merely human recognition. The initial negotiations reveal complexities that previous labors only hinted at through their simpler moral frameworks. Hippolyta is perfectly capable of understanding Heracles' situation. She recognizes the injustice of his servitude to Eurystheus and sympathizes with someone trapped by circumstances beyond their control. The problem isn't communication or mutual understanding, it's the underlying political implications of handing over symbols of Amazon sovereignty to foreign male authorities. The Amazon military system provides fascinating insights into alternative approaches to warfare and social organization that challenge Greek assumptions about natural gender roles. These women have developed cavalry tactics, archery techniques, and combat formations that represent genuine innovations rather than simple imitations of male military traditions. They're not trying to prove they can fight like men, they've created entirely different approaches to violence that work better than conventional methods. Historians still argue whether the Amazons represent distorted cultural memories of actual matriarchal societies or pure fantasy designed to explore anxieties about gender role reversals, but archaeological evidence suggests that warrior women played significant roles in various Bronze Age civilizations. The underlying questions about women's capabilities and social limitations remain relevant across historical periods and cultural contexts. The social dynamics that emerge during extended negotiations reveal how much Heracles has learned about leadership and diplomacy through his previous encounters with impossible situations. Instead of demanding the belt through threats or attempting to take it by force, he approaches the situation as a problem requiring creative solutions that acknowledge everyone's legitimate interests. Sometimes heroism involves finding ways for everyone to win rather than determining who gets defeated. You're watching political theater that operates on multiple levels simultaneously: personal interaction between individuals who respect each other's capabilities, diplomatic negotiation between representatives of different civilizations, and cultural exchange that could influence relationships between entire peoples. The belt transfer becomes less important than the precedent being established for future interactions between Amazon and Greek societies. The festival atmosphere that develops around these negotiations provides some of the most genuinely enjoyable moments in the entire labor cycle. Amazon hospitality combines martial displays with cultural presentations that showcase achievements their civilization has accomplished in isolation from Mediterranean influence. Their poetry, music, and artistic traditions reflect perspectives that have developed without male input or approval, creating forms of expression that Greek audiences find simultaneously alien and compelling. The athletic competitions that follow formal diplomatic sessions allow for cultural exchange through shared appreciation of physical excellence and competitive achievement. You watch Amazon warriors demonstrate techniques that Greek heroes immediately want to learn, while Heracles shares methods that his hosts find genuinely useful for their own military training. Sometimes the best diplomacy happens through mutual recognition of professional competence rather than formal treaty negotiations. But you're also aware that other forces are working to complicate what could have been a straightforward exchange between reasonable people who understand each other's positions. Hera's continued interference in Heracles' affairs extends beyond simple personal vendetta into systematic sabotage of any situation that might allow him to succeed through intelligence and diplomacy rather than pure violence. The rumor campaign that begins circulating through Amazon ranks represents psychological warfare designed to transform a successful negotiation into violent confrontation. Suddenly, stories spread suggesting that Heracles plans to kidnap their queen, enslave their warriors, and generally behave like the worst possible example of Greek male behavior toward foreign women. It's character assassination designed to trigger exactly the kind of cultural fears that would make peaceful resolution impossible. The deteriorating situation requires quick thinking and moral clarity about what's actually important in circumstances where success and failure depend on factors beyond individual control. Hippolyta still understands the real situation, but her warriors are beginning to respond to rumors that paint every Greek action as potential threat. Political panic spreads faster than accurate information, especially when it confirms existing prejudices. The combat that erupts despite everyone's best intentions provides some of the most ethically complex fighting in the entire labor cycle. You're watching heroes and warriors who respect each other personally but find themselves trapped in a conflict that serves no one's actual interests. The Amazons fight with skill that matches anything Heracles has encountered, while he struggles to defend himself without causing unnecessary casualties among people who don't deserve to suffer for Hera's manipulations. The belt acquisition happens amid chaos that transforms what should have been a diplomatic triumph into another example of how divine interference can corrupt human achievement. Hippolyta gives Heracles the belt willingly, understanding that he needs it to complete his labor, but the gesture gets lost in fighting that makes her appear to be under duress rather than acting from her own political judgment. The aftermath reveals bitter lessons about the limits of individual heroism when confronting systematic problems that extend beyond personal courage or moral clarity. The Amazon conflict succeeds as a labor completion but fails as an opportunity for genuine cultural bridge building between civilizations that could have learned valuable lessons from each other. Perfect solutions remain theoretical when gods use human relationships as battlegrounds for their own petty conflicts. You're watching Heracles sail away with the golden belt secured, but understand that this victory tastes different from previous achievements. Sometimes success requires accepting that you can't control all the variables that determine how your actions will be interpreted or remembered. Heroic intention and heroic result don't always coordinate as neatly as traditional stories suggest they should. You're journeying to the absolute edge of the known world, where the sun sets into waters that most sailors believe lead directly to the realm of the dead. The island of Erythea lies beyond the pillars of Heracles. Yes, those pillars will be named after our hero, but right now they're just the geographical markers that separate civilization from whatever lies beyond human understanding. Geryon, the three-bodied giant who guards the red cattle, represents the kind of opponent that makes previous challenges look like practice exercises for the real impossibilities. The logistics of reaching Erythea require solving transportation problems that push ancient technology beyond its theoretical limits. No normal ship can survive the journey through waters where Oceanus flows around the world's edge, where sea monsters large enough to swallow islands patrol territories that exist outside conventional geography. Heracles needs divine intervention just to get to the starting line of this particular impossible task, which suggests that some challenges transcend human capability regardless of individual heroism. You watch him negotiate with Helios himself, the sun god whose golden cup travels across the sky daily before sailing back through the western ocean to reach the eastern horizon by dawn. It's the kind of transportation request that would challenge modern diplomatic protocols. How do you politely ask to borrow a solar deity's personal vehicle for a cattle-rustling expedition that technically qualifies as armed robbery on an international scale? The Golden Cup voyage provides experiences that redefine concepts of travel and exploration beyond anything previous adventures have offered. You're sailing through waters where normal rules of navigation become meaningless, where distances can't be measured in conventional terms, and where the boundary between mythological space and physical geography dissolves into something that challenges basic assumptions about how reality operates. Ancient sources describe Gerion as having 3 complete human torsos sharing a single waist, which creates combat challenges that go beyond simple mathematical multiplication of opponents. Each body has its own personality, fighting style, and tactical preferences, but they must coordinate through shared lower anatomy in ways that create both advantages and vulnerabilities. It's like fighting a committee that has achieved supernatural physical integration while maintaining individual psychological identity. The cattle themselves represent wealth that transcends normal economic categories. These aren't ordinary livestock that happen to be valuable, but divine animals whose red coloring reflects their connection to solar power and cosmic forces. Stealing them isn't just theft, it's an action that could potentially disrupt natural cycles that govern daylight, seasonal change, and agricultural fertility across the entire Mediterranean world. The island's geography reflects its position at the boundary between human and divine realms, where normal environmental rules bend to accommodate supernatural inhabitants. You're exploring landscapes that seem familiar until you notice details that shouldn't exist, shadows that fall upward, grass that grows downward into the sky, trees whose roots extend into air while their branches disappear into solid ground. Reality operates according to different principles when you travel far enough from human civilization. Historians still argue whether the Gerion encounter represents garbled cultural memory of actual transoceanic contact or pure mythological invention designed to explore concepts about the limits of heroic ambition, but recent archaeological discoveries suggest that Bronze Age Mediterranean peoples had more extensive geographical knowledge than previously assumed. The underlying questions about exploration and the boundaries of the known world remain relevant across historical periods. The Guardian situation reveals additional complications that make previous labor opponents seem straightforward by comparison. Gerion isn't alone on his island, he's protected by Orthrus, a 2-headed dog that serves as early warning system and first line of defense against intruders, plus Eurytion, a herdsman whose loyalty has been earned through generations of shared isolation at the world's edge. You're not just fighting one impossible opponent, you're confronting an entire defensive system designed by someone who has had unlimited time to prepare for exactly this kind of challenge. The tactical approach requires integrating lessons learned from all previous encounters with opponents who possess supernatural advantages. Gerion's 3-body configuration means that conventional combat strategies become ineffective. You can't focus on single targets when your opponent literally multitasks at a level that defies human comprehension. Each torso can engage different aspects of the fight simultaneously, creating combat scenarios that exceed human ability to process and respond to multiple threats. The dog fight provides a warm-up that demonstrates just how thoroughly this island's defensive system has been optimized for dealing with heroes who might think their previous achievements qualify them for handling anything. Orthrus combines the loyalty of domestic animals with supernatural strength and the tactical advantage of having twice as many teeth as normal predators. It's like fighting 2 perfectly coordinated wolves that share a single brain but maintain independent initiative. The herdsman battle adds emotional complexity that previous encounters have largely avoided through their focus on obviously monstrous opponents. Eurytion is human, but his humanity has been shaped by circumstances that place him outside normal categories of moral judgment. He's defending his home, his livelihood, and his friend against an intruder who represents everything his isolated existence has been organized to resist. Sometimes heroic quests require defeating people who have perfectly reasonable grounds for opposing heroic objectives. The cattle roundup that follows successful combat provides logistical challenges that transform military victory into pastoral comedy. You're watching a hero whose previous experience with livestock extends to cleaning stables' attempt to manage a herd of divine animals that have never been handled by anyone except their original guardian. The cows have opinions about travel arrangements, and their opinions don't necessarily align with human transportation schedules. The actual confrontation with Georion demonstrates why this labor ranks among the most genuinely terrifying challenges in the entire cycle. Each of his 3 torsos wields weapons appropriate to different combat styles, spears, swords, and bows that allow for simultaneous long-range, medium-range, and close combat engagement. It's like fighting 3 expert warriors who share perfect tactical coordination without any of the communication delays that normally limit group combat effectiveness. The combat duration extends beyond anything previous encounters have required, testing endurance as much as strength or tactical intelligence. You're watching sustained fighting that continues until Heracles discovers vulnerabilities in Georion's seemingly perfect defensive system. The shared waist that connects 3 torsos also represents a single point of failure that can disable the entire multibody configuration. Sometimes the most sophisticated systems contain weaknesses that simpler arrangements avoid. The victory aftermath involves establishing the geographic markers that will permanently commemorate this achievement while solving practical problems about returning stolen divine cattle to a king who probably doesn't want to deal with livestock that could theoretically file complaints directly with solar deities. The Pillars of Heracles become both navigation landmarks and permanent testimony to the distances heroes will travel when cosmic forces determine their itinerary. The return journey provides opportunities for reflection on how individual achievements accumulate into something approaching legendary status while creating problems that extend far beyond personal glory. You're watching the consolidation of heroic reputation that will influence how future generations understand the relationship between human ambition and divine possibility. The cattle theft succeeds brilliantly, but success at this level creates expectations that heroes themselves might struggle to meet consistently. The geographical implications extend beyond simple map-making into questions about human exploration and the boundaries of achievable knowledge. Heracles has literally traveled to the edge of the world and returned with proof, expanding human understanding of what exists beyond familiar territories while establishing precedents for the kind of impossible journeys that heroes might be expected to undertake. You're venturing into territories where geography becomes theology, seeking the Garden of the Hesperides where immortal nymphs tend the golden apples that represent knowledge too dangerous for mortal minds to possess safely. These aren't ordinary fruit that happen to be valuable, they're the wedding gifts Gaia gave to Hera, symbols of divine wisdom that could theoretically grant understanding of cosmic secrets that gods prefer to keep private. Sometimes the most precious treasures are guarded not by monsters but by the weight of responsibility that comes with possessing them. The location of this garden exists outside normal geographical categories, somewhere beyond the Atlas Mountains where the Titan Atlas holds up the sky in eternal punishment for challenging Zeus's authority. You're navigating through landscapes where mythological space intersects with physical reality in ways that make conventional exploration techniques completely useless. The garden could be anywhere or everywhere, depending on factors that mortal logic struggles to comprehend effectively. The search process reveals how much Heracles has learned about patience and systematic problem-solving through his previous encounters with impossible challenges. Instead of wandering randomly through territories that might not even exist in consistent locations, he begins gathering intelligence from sources that understand how divine geography operates according to principles that transcend human map-making capabilities. You watch him consult with sea deities who remember when the world was younger and boundaries between realms were more fluid than current arrangements allow. Nereus, the old man of the sea, provides crucial information about navigation routes that exist only under specific cosmic conditions, when stellar alignments create temporary pathways through spaces that normally remain inaccessible to mortal travelers. Ancient sources describe the Hesperides as nymphs whose beauty reflects their connection to sunset light and golden hour illumination, beings who exist in permanent twilight between day and night. Their voices carry harmonies that induce states of consciousness where mortal minds can temporarily comprehend cosmic truths without being destroyed by the experience. They're not guards in any conventional sense. They're custodians of knowledge that requires spiritual preparation before it can be safely received. The garden itself represents paradise in forms that challenge human assumptions about what perfection might actually entail. Every plant grows according to divine intention rather than natural selection, creating ecosystems where beauty and function integrate in ways that make earthly gardens seem like crude approximations of botanical possibility. The air itself carries fragrances that induce altered states of consciousness, while water flows upward toward light sources that exist independently of sun or moon. The dragon laden that coils around the apple tree presents challenges that extend beyond physical combat into questions about the relationship between wisdom and protection. This isn't a monster guarding treasure. It's a cosmic principle that ensures divine knowledge remains available only to those who demonstrate readiness to handle responsibilities that come with understanding how reality actually operates beneath its surface appearances. Historians still argue whether the Garden of the Hesperides represents symbolic commentary on the dangers of seeking forbidden knowledge or actual geographical memory of places where ancient peoples encountered phenomena that challenged their understanding of natural law, but the underlying themes about curiosity and responsibility remain relevant across cultures and historical periods. Some knowledge requires earning through demonstrated wisdom rather than simple acquisition through heroic effort. The approach strategy requires acknowledging that this challenge operates according to different rules than previous labors have established. Physical strength, tactical intelligence, and combat experience become largely irrelevant when confronting problems that exist primarily in spiritual and philosophical dimensions. Heracles must learn entirely new categories of problem-solving that integrate heroic capability with cosmic understanding. The encounter with Atlas provides one of the most profound moments in the entire labor cycle, where individual heroism intersects with cosmic responsibility in ways that redefine concepts of strength and endurance. You're watching a conversation between someone who bears the weight of impossible challenges and someone who literally bears the weight of the sky, two individuals whose circumstances transcend normal categories of human experience. Atlas represents punishment that has evolved into cosmic necessity. His eternal task of supporting the heavens has become so integrated into universal structure that releasing him would cause catastrophic collapse of reality itself. But he also possesses knowledge about divine geography and cosmic mechanics that makes him uniquely qualified to understand how the garden's protections might be temporarily circumvented without violating fundamental principles. The bargain that emerges from their negotiation demonstrates sophisticated understanding of shared responsibility and mutual benefit that previous encounters have only hinted at through their simpler moral frameworks. Atlas agrees to retrieve the apples personally while Heracles temporarily assumes the burden of supporting the sky, creating a solution that acknowledges both heroes' unique capabilities while distributing cosmic responsibility in sustainable ways. The weight-bearing experience provides insights into the nature of cosmic architecture and divine punishment that no mortal has ever survived long enough to understand fully. You're watching Heracles discover what it actually means to hold up the heavens, feeling the gravitational forces and celestial mechanics that keep reality stable while experiencing firsthand why Atlas considers his burden to be beyond normal categories of suffering. The philosophical implications extend beyond simple physical challenge into questions about justice, responsibility, and the relationship between individual action and cosmic consequence. Atlas's punishment represents divine justice taken to extremes that make normal moral categories seem inadequate, while Heracles' willingness to share the burden temporarily demonstrates heroic empathy that transcends self-interest. The apple acquisition happens through cooperation rather than conquest, establishing precedents for how impossible challenges might be resolved through mutual understanding rather than violent confrontation. Atlas returns with 3 golden apples that represent not just mission success but proof that some problems require collaborative solutions that acknowledge everyone's legitimate interests and capabilities. The deception attempt that follows reveals interesting details about Titan psychology and the relationship between eternal punishment and accumulated resentment. Atlas suggests that Heracles continues supporting the sky while he personally delivers the apples to Eurystheus, which would technically fulfill the labor requirements while permanently transferring cosmic responsibility to someone else. It's creative problem-solving that demonstrates why Titans originally challenged divine authority. The counter-deception that resolves this situation shows how much Heracles has learned about strategic thinking and psychological manipulation through his encounters with opponents who possess superhuman intelligence. He agrees to Atlas's proposal but requests assistance adjusting his position to bear the weight more comfortably, then simply walks away once the Titan has resumed his traditional burden. Sometimes the best solutions to impossible problems involve accepting that some people can't be trusted despite their reasonable grievances. The return journey with the golden apples provides opportunities for reflection on knowledge, responsibility, and the prices that heroes pay for achievements that transcend normal human limitations. You're carrying fruit that represents cosmic understanding, but understanding that comes with obligations that might exceed heroic capability to fulfill responsibly. Perfect knowledge and perfect freedom rarely coordinate as neatly as heroic ambition assumes they should. The disposal of the apples after labor completion reveals crucial insights about divine property and mortal stewardship. Athena personally returns the fruit to the Hesperides garden, explaining that some treasures exist outside normal categories of ownership and must be preserved in their proper cosmic contexts rather than being claimed as personal achievements. Heroes accomplish impossible tasks, but the results don't always belong to the heroes who accomplish them. You're descending through caverns that lead to the one place where even heroes must acknowledge their mortality, where the authority of earthly kings becomes meaningless and the strength that has carried Heracles through 11 impossible labors offers no guarantee of safe passage. The entrance to Hades yawns before you like a wound in the world itself, exhaling vapors that carry the scent of every death that has ever occurred since life began its brief dance against the inevitable darkness. Sometimes the greatest courage involves walking voluntarily toward the one appointment that no hero can ultimately avoid. The geography of descent reveals landscapes that exist according to principles that have nothing to do with earthly physics or familiar navigation techniques. You're following pathways that spiral downward through increasing darkness while somehow maintaining illumination that allows vision without requiring light sources. The air grows thicker with each step, carrying whispers and languages that predate human speech, voices of the dead who remember what it felt like to breathe before they learned what it means to exist without breath. The psychological preparation required for this journey extends beyond anything previous labors have demanded, requiring mental frameworks that can accommodate encounters with deceased family members, fallen enemies, and everyone whose death has resulted directly or indirectly from heroic actions. The underworld doesn't just contain the dead, it contains the consequences of every choice that has led to death, every moment where different decisions might have preserved lives that heroic necessity required ending. You watch Heracles consult with Athena and Hermes, the only deities who regularly travel between the world of the living and the realm of the dead without suffering permanent transformation from the experience. Their guidance proves essential for navigating spiritual territories where normal heroic instincts become not just useless but actively dangerous. The underworld operates according to laws that punish presumption and reward respectful acknowledgement of death's ultimate authority. Ancient sources describe the river Styx as more than a geographical boundary. It represents the fundamental divide between states of existence that can be crossed but never truly bridged. Charon, the ferryman who transports souls across these waters, encounters his first living passenger in generations, requiring negotiations that challenge both parties' understanding of proper protocol for impossible situations. Even death's bureaucracy occasionally faces circumstances that exceed standard operating procedures. The ferry ride provides some of the most haunting imagery in the entire labor cycle, as you glide across waters that reflect not current appearances but the essential nature of everyone they carry. You see Heracles as the dead see him, not as a hero accumulating glorious achievements but as a mortal whose actions have sent countless souls to these very shores. The perspective shift forces acknowledgement of costs that heroic narratives typically minimize through their focus on individual accomplishment rather than collective consequence. The landscape of Hades proper reveals suffering and punishment organized according to divine justice systems that make earthly law codes seem like children's games. Tantalus reaches eternally for fruit that retreats from his grasp, Sisyphus pushes his boulder up slopes that defeat every attempt at permanent progress, and the Danaids pour water into vessels that can never be filled. You're witnessing cosmic irony elevated to an art form, where punishment fits crime with mathematical precision that exceeds human understanding of proportional justice. But you're also observing regions where the dead find peace that living people rarely achieve, where souls freed from physical limitations explore forms of existence that transcend earthly categories of pleasure and satisfaction. The underworld contains multiple realms that accommodate different kinds of afterlife experience, from punishment to reward to simple continuation of consciousness in forms that don't require biological support systems. Historians still argue whether ancient Greek underworld descriptions represent literal religious beliefs or sophisticated metaphorical frameworks for discussing psychological and philosophical concepts about mortality, consciousness, and moral responsibility. But the underlying questions about death's meaning and the relationship between life and afterlife remain central to human experience across cultures and historical periods. The approach to Cerberus requires diplomatic skills that previous encounters with monstrous opponents have only begun to develop. This isn't a creature that can be defeated through combat, it's a cosmic principle that guards the boundary between life and death, ensuring that the living don't casually invade death's realm while preventing the dead from returning to disturb the world of the living. Cerberus represents order itself, maintaining separations that keep reality stable and comprehensible. The three-headed structure creates challenges that extend beyond simple mathematical multiplication of dog-related problems. Each head possesses different aspects of supernatural awareness. One sees the past, one perceives the present, and one glimpses possible futures. Fighting Cerberus would require confronting not just a powerful opponent but an entity that understands every heroic action that has led to this moment and every possible consequence that might result from current choices. The negotiation with Hades himself demonstrates the evolution of Heracles' understanding about authority, respect, and the limits of heroic privilege. The god of the dead doesn't respond to threats or attempts at intimidation. He's seen every form of human power reduced to irrelevance by the equalizing force of mortality. But he does appreciate honest acknowledgement of the underworld's legitimate authority and genuine respect for the cosmic functions that death serves in maintaining universal balance. The capture conditions that emerge from their conversation reflect sophisticated understanding of mutual respect and temporary accommodation of conflicting needs. Hades permits Cerberus's removal provided that Heracles can subdue the guardian without using weapons, acknowledging the dog's nature as cosmic principle rather than simple beast. It's a challenge that requires integrating physical strength with spiritual understanding in ways that transcend conventional categories of heroic achievement. The wrestling match that follows provides some of the most intense physical confrontation in the entire labor cycle, as you watch Heracles grapple with an opponent whose strength reflects the cosmic forces that separate life from death. Cerberus fights with supernatural power that makes previous encounters seem like practice exercises, but also with restraint that suggests understanding of the temporary nature of this conflict and respect for the heroic purpose it serves. The submission process reveals crucial insights about the relationship between strength and authority, power and respect. Cerberus yields not because it has been defeated but because Heracles has demonstrated understanding of proper protocol and genuine respect for the cosmic order that the three-headed dog represents. Sometimes the greatest victories involve earning cooperation rather than imposing dominance through superior force. The ascent from the underworld with Cerberus provides experiences that redefine concepts of transition between states of existence. You're bringing Death's guardian into the realm of the living, temporarily disrupting the fundamental boundaries that keep reality comprehensible while ensuring that the disruption serves purposes that justify the cosmic inconvenience. The sunlight that greets your emergence carries intensity that makes ordinary illumination seem like shadow. The presentation to Eurystheus reaches new heights of comic terror as the king confronts the ultimate symbol of mortality in the form of a three-headed dog whose mere presence transforms the familiar world into something that acknowledges death's constant proximity. The bronze jar that has protected him through 11 previous encounters proves inadequate when confronted with a guardian that represents inevitability rather than simply danger. The return journey to the underworld demonstrates Heracles' growing understanding of cosmic responsibility and the temporary nature of heroic achievements. Cerberus belongs in the realm of the dead, where its cosmic function serves universal rather than personal purposes. Heroes accomplish impossible tasks, but they must also ensure that their accomplishments don't disrupt the fundamental order that makes existence itself possible for everyone else. You're watching the completion of a labor that transcends individual achievement to become a statement about heroic maturity and understanding of place within cosmic order. The descent into Death's realm and safe return proves not just Heracles' extraordinary capabilities but his developing wisdom about when to exercise those capabilities and when to acknowledge the legitimate authority of forces that exceed heroic power. You're witnessing the completion of a decade-long odyssey through impossibility, watching Heracles stand before Eurystheus with the three-headed guardian of the underworld as proof that even death's boundaries can be temporarily crossed by someone who understands both strength and respect. The 12 labors are complete, each one a testament to human potential when pushed beyond normal limitations by divine cruelty and cosmic necessity. But you're also watching the moment when heroic achievement transforms into something that might be more burden than blessing, more trap than liberation. The king's reaction to seeing Cerberus represents the culmination of years of escalating terror that began with a simple lion's hide and has progressed through increasingly impossible demonstrations of superhuman capability. Eurystheus has spent a decade hiding in bronze jars while his cousin accomplishes tasks that redefine the boundaries of achievable human action. Now he's confronted with proof that even the fundamental separation between life and death can be temporarily overcome through heroic determination combined with divine cooperation. The formal completion ceremony that follows carries emotional weight that previous labor conclusions have only hinted at through their focus on individual achievements rather than accumulated transformation. You're watching someone who has become fundamentally different from the person who first approached the Nemean Lion's cave, someone whose experiences have created capabilities and perspectives that separate him from normal human categories of understanding and expectation. Ancient sources describe this moment as both triumph and tragedy, representing the successful completion of an impossible punishment while simultaneously marking the beginning of isolation that heroic fame creates between extraordinary individuals and the communities they serve. Heracles has proven that human potential extends far beyond conventional limitations, but proving superhuman capability creates social dynamics that make normal human relationships increasingly difficult to maintain. The political implications of completing the labors extend beyond simple personal vindication into questions about authority, justice, and the relationship between individual achievement and social order. Eurystheus can no longer deny his cousin's extraordinary capabilities, but acknowledging heroic achievement also means confronting the illegitimate foundations of his own royal authority. Sometimes success forces uncomfortable recognition of systemic problems that everyone has preferred to ignore. The immediate aftermath reveals the complex relationship between completion and continuation that characterizes heroic narratives across cultures and historical periods. The labors are finished, but the person who completed them has been transformed into someone who can't simply return to normal life as if extraordinary experiences never occurred. Heroic achievement creates expectations and obligations that extend far beyond the specific tasks that originally defined heroic purpose. You watch Heracles grapple with the realization that freedom from servitude doesn't automatically translate into freedom from the consequences of heroic fame. Everyone who knows about the 12 labors now understands that impossible challenges can be overcome through sufficient determination and divine cooperation, but they also expect that such capabilities will remain available for future impossible situations that might require heroic intervention. The reputation that spreads throughout the Mediterranean world carries both honor and burden in proportions that make heroic status seem like a mixed blessing at best. Kings who hear about someone capable of cleaning the Augean stables in a single day immediately begin calculating how such capabilities might be applied to their own impossible problems. Heroes become resources that everyone assumes they can access when facing challenges that exceed normal human capacity to resolve. Historians still argue whether the completion of the 12 labors represents the end of Heracles' story or merely the conclusion of its first major movement, but ancient sources consistently describe this moment as a transition rather than a conclusion. The labors establish heroic credentials that enable future adventures while creating obligations that make retirement from heroic activity essentially impossible. Success becomes its own form of imprisonment. The divine perspective on these achievements reveals interesting tensions between cosmic justice and individual fulfillment that complicate simple narratives about punishment and redemption. Hera's original goal of destroying Heracles through impossible challenges has partially succeeded. The person who completed the labors bears psychological scars and social isolation that represent forms of damage that can't be healed through additional heroic achievements. But the labors have also established precedents for human capability that influence how both mortals and immortals understand the relationship between individual potential and cosmic limitation. Zeus himself acknowledges that his son has demonstrated qualities that transcend normal categories of heroic excellence, achieving something that approaches divine capability while maintaining fundamentally human perspective and moral framework. The philosophical implications extend beyond personal achievement into questions about the nature of human potential and the costs associated with fully realizing extraordinary capabilities. Heracles has proven that individuals can accomplish tasks that seem to violate natural law, but proving such capabilities creates expectations and responsibilities that might exceed what any single person can sustainably maintain over extended periods. The social dynamics that emerge around completed heroic status reveal uncomfortable truths about how communities respond to individuals who demonstrate capabilities that exceed normal human limitations. Instead of celebration, there's often a mixture of awe and fear that creates distance between heroes and the people they've served. Extraordinary achievement can become a form of exile from normal human community, regardless of the hero's personal preferences about social integration. You're watching the consolidation of legendary status that will influence how future generations understand the relationship between human ambition and cosmic possibility. The 12 labors become a template for heroic achievement that establishes both possibilities and limitations for what individuals might accomplish when pushed beyond conventional boundaries by extraordinary circumstances. The immediate practical consequences involve dealing with requests from throughout the known world for heroic intervention in situations that local authorities can't resolve through normal means. Every impossible problem becomes a potential summons for someone who has demonstrated that impossible problems can sometimes be solved through sufficient determination and divine cooperation. Heroic capability creates heroic obligation that operates independently of personal choice. The psychological adjustment required for transitioning from task-focused servitude to open-ended heroic availability represents challenges that previous experiences have only partially prepared him to handle. The labors provided clear objectives and definite completion criteria, but ongoing heroic status involves constant evaluation of which requests deserve heroic intervention and which represent inappropriate uses of extraordinary capabilities. The family dynamics that have been suspended during the labor period now require attention and resolution in ways that acknowledge how fundamentally the person who began this journey has been transformed by experiences that exceed normal categories of personal development. Megara and their children must learn to relate to someone who has become partially divine through achievement while retaining fundamentally human emotional needs and social desires. You're observing the moment when individual heroic achievement intersects with cosmic responsibility in ways that transform personal liberation into something that might feel more like eternal obligation. The labors are complete, but the person who completed them has become something that transcends normal human categories while remaining fundamentally committed to human values and community welfare. The weight of accumulated experience settles around Heracles like invisible armor that protects against normal human limitations while isolating him from normal human connection. You can see in his eyes the reflection of places that exist beyond geographical boundaries, creatures that challenge fundamental assumptions about reality, and responsibilities that extend far beyond personal survival or individual fulfillment. As the sun sets on this chapter of impossibility overcome through heroic determination, you understand that some achievements create more questions than they answer, more obligations than they fulfill. The 12 labors represent both the ultimate expression of human potential and a demonstration of why such potential might be more curse than blessing for the individuals who possess it. The labors are complete, but their completion reveals truths about heroic achievement that traditional stories often overlook in their focus on triumph over impossibility. You've watched someone transcend human limitations through determination and divine cooperation, but transcendence carries prices that heroes themselves rarely anticipate when they begin their journeys toward legendary status. The bronze jar sits empty now, no longer needed to protect a king from impossible demonstrations of superhuman capability. But the person who made such protection unnecessary has discovered that proving you can overcome any challenge creates expectations that might be more confining than the original servitude they were meant to resolve. Sometimes the greatest heroes are trapped not by their failures but by their successes. The Mediterranean world spreads before someone who has redefined the boundaries of human achievement, but those boundaries have shifted in ways that make normal human life increasingly difficult to maintain. Every sunset carries the possibility of impossible requests from people who assume that heroic capability means heroic availability, regardless of personal cost or individual preference about how extraordinary abilities should be employed. You're drifting now toward sleep, your mind carrying images of golden fleeces and three-headed dogs, immortal fruit and man-eating horses, impossible tasks completed through combinations of strength and wisdom that reveal human potential operating at levels that challenge divine prerogative. The hero's journey continues beyond the point where traditional stories end, carrying burdens that success creates rather than eliminates. Let these visions settle gently into your dreams, where impossible achievements feel natural and heroic capabilities seem like birthright rather than burden. In sleep, everyone can wrestle lions and clean stables, capture divine animals and negotiate with gods, accomplish the impossible without paying the prices that heroic achievement demands in the waking world where legends must live with the consequences of their extraordinary actions. The soft darkness wraps around you like Heracles' lion skin, protective and warm, carrying you toward rest that heroes themselves rarely achieve. Dream of golden apples that grant wisdom without responsibility, of labors that end with celebration rather than obligation, of strength that serves joy rather than endless duty to communities that need heroes but struggle to love the people who become them. Sleep well, knowing that somewhere in the realm of myth and memory, impossible tasks continue to be accomplished by those strong enough to bear both triumph and its aftermath. The labors are complete, but their echo resonates through time, reminding every generation that human potential exceeds even its own understanding of what might be possible when necessity and courage combine in proportions that transform individuals into something approaching legend.